Welcome to the live stream, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we're going to be diving into accessibility in games. It's going to be another game industry discussion, and I'm your host today, Bumpy McSquigums, joined by Cupogoodness and a Tiny Disaster. Hello, and welcome. Something disappeared. You guys are very quiet. Why are you so quiet?
Oh, we were waiting for the video, I think. I was like, okay, here comes the camera.
Nope,
and I was going to do a wave.
Yeah.
What's up? Okay, so we're just going to be hanging.
I was just
Right.
frantically muting all my tabs.
Hey, there we go. We're back after a week off. Not really a week off for us, but it was a week off of the stream. When it's a week off of the stream, it means that we're working
We're
really
clearly
hard.
sleeping in the entire day, just recovering.
There's been I think a week off for recovery at some point in our history here, our short history, but the last week was not that. It was very much too much on the plate for most of us, so we took that on. Personally had Bumpy and I and Tiny Disaster's been involved with this to some degree as well. We had a really nice launch for Cookserve Forever in terms of its not game launch, but its Steam store page launch and its reveal, its unveiling, I should say. We peeled the curtain back. Hey, Missy, what's up? So yeah, we peeled the curtain back on that, and it went pretty well. I'm talking to that guy that I always bring up on this stream, the Game Discoverer Co. newsletter guy. I share his articles a lot. I'm going to talk to him this week about how it went, and hopefully we'll see something out of that on that newsletter down the road. And something maybe we can talk about on here and stuff in terms of the efforts we made, the results we achieved, and why that probably only applies to developers that have, are veterans or have successful releases already in their established IPs, things like that. That sort. It's not. This would not be a tale that would necessarily aid new developers as much. Although there are some things to glean. I just think that you can't deny that one of the biggest benefits that we had was that there was already 3 games before this game that had essentially the same title and was running under the same IP. So there's things going on with that in a really nice way. I'd say it's like a great start, but it's a start. So we still have a long ways to go to build our wishlist numbers up and get them in a place where we're feeling like it's going to sell to expectations. The one thing that we did achieve in about 3.5 days is get on the popular upcoming section on like the list. There's like a popular upcoming list and a top wish list list. So we made one of those 2 lists that we're trying to go for in the pre-release in a matter of days, and we have about 9 to 12 months before we're going to have our initial release. So that is extremely beneficial. I'm not trying to toot my own horn here as much as saying it, pointing out the the benefits of being on the popular upcoming section. I think it's a permanent stay, and we're down low on the list right now because we have a 2023 release window. But as that chronologically climbs up, we get more and more impressions, people seeing that list. Obviously, when you're higher on a list of that sort, you're going to get more impressions. So the idea is, as you get closer to release, you get more views and hopefully more wish lists. So really cool stuff. I'm tired, as you might see in my eyes, but I'm excited. Like it's a really good first step, and job's not finished, as Kobe Bryant once said, but we got a ways to go. And I'm excited with the start. I'm excited with where we're at. And again, big thanks to Tiny Disaster, Bumpy McSquigums, and the whole Indie Brothers team for helping us get to where we are right now. And we're going to keep moving forward. The stream team was awesome. We got some great assets for the stream team this time around that worked really well, I think. Benefited us, everybody involved really well. And yeah, I'll stop talking about me and stuff, and we'll move forward on our actual topic today. But anyway,
sure you will. So just out of curiosity, how do you see more of the popular upcoming list? Because it only shows like 10. And beyond that, so let's go to upcoming releases.
So I go to store, we go popular upcoming, we go upcoming releases, and then we go down to popular upcoming releases on the page, and then you see more, and then that's the huge list.
So you have to do it twice, essentially. Gotcha.
Yeah, Control F cook, and it'll be like loading a lot, and then when you get to the bottom of the list, you can then click it once more on the arrow, and it will take you to where we are. We're right below Arms Trade Tycoon Tanks, and above Hyper Light Breaker. Again, those aren't those aren't listed in any other way than the fact that we have a release date that's really far out. Yeah, exactly. Because it's release windows, right? So
what is that? I just saw one for 2021. John Mambo. Well, I think you missed your date.
Probably needs to get out. Yeah. Or that's one of those that were popular and then the dev has just disappeared off the map, right? Because it's like he hasn't touched a store page in like 2 or 3 years. Yeah, that's no good.
That's unfortunate.
Or at least 1 year.
Last year, guys. What?
So anyway, that's if we talk about when you release how to get on wanting to get on the new and trending section. And it can be a fleeting thing. Sometimes you can be on the new and trending section for hours. Sometimes you can make it more of a permanent stay where it's like, okay, now I'm on the list, and until I get knocked down by another 5 to 10 new and trending games, then we'll remain on the front page kind of thing. So this is kind of like that, but only the pre-release, but the popular upcoming. But we're also going to be shooting for the top wish lists, which of course is more of a cumulative thing. So that's going to take more time, right? We can't just we hit the algorithm really well and got a popular upcoming. You can't really do that with top wish lists. You have to reach a threshold, and we're going to hopefully reach that threshold and get on that list. Not soon, but hopefully later this year is the idea, because we have more events, showcases, etc. coming up. All the things that we talk about on the show that is important to do for an indie dev. I promise you, we're trying to do that for Kickstarter Forever right now. So
excellent. So today, accessibility in gaming. I have one specific thing that I am looking forward to talking about, but we'll lead into that a little bit later on. Is there a particular time or thing that you've seen in gaming specifically that has helped you guys over the course that you're a big fan of, or what?
Well, I mean, go ahead, Tiny Esther.
I was just gonna say I have a bit of a just a snippet from an article to kick things off. Kind of, it's not defining accessibility in games, but the difficulty around it, just so we're kind of all on the same page as we jump into the topic. And I just thought it was an interesting article as well. I'll throw it link in the chat in a second. But this is from What Accessibility Means in Game Design by Josh Breiser. Accessibility means different things for different people, and why there's a problem both among consumers and developers in terms of defining it. There's no such thing as a checklist for accessibility, that if a game has A, B, and C, it isn't automatically accessible to everyone. There are certain elements that are universal, such as control rebindings, volume sliders, and text size that can fit in any video game. However, accessibility needs to be approached differently for each genre, each gameplay loop. What works in one doesn't necessarily work in the other. Oops, just lost my headphone. For a game to be accessible, it's important to look at what the major pain points and walls that are stopping someone from experiencing a game. So I just thought that was a nice way of looking at it, because it isn't just like if you have this, this, and this, your game is accessible. Yay, good job, team.
Yeah, absolutely. The quest to be accessible is sort of never ending, because there's just always going to be new cases, edge cases, in circumstances. Accessibility for me, really has helped me empathize, also appreciate, my not having a deficit to have to work with. I at first when you hear accessibility and I'm not I wasn't didn't have any friction against it, but I was kind of going, oh, okay, what's this all? This is obviously a younger me and stuff like that. What's this all about? What's the purpose of this? And then you think about it, some of the first stuff I saw in accessibility was for colorblind modes and things of that sort. Reminded me of the accessibility when you're driving. If you had color blindness, you always know that red light's on top, green light's on bottom. The design there is put in place for a reason like that. So,
except in Europe, I think it's the opposite, isn't it?
You want to look it up if you go to another country, most likely, before you get on the road.
Definitely check that one.
Because things change, but within I think the States and I think North America generally, yeah, exactly. You're looking at a that kind of thing, and that's just a small example of what I think about when think about allowing people to with just disabilities and deficits, challenges that they're working on, that they're dealing with long term. And one thing that I always think about is there is no getting good or getting over some of these things, right? You can't just overcome. if you don't have fingers, like, there may be a situation where you might be able to overcome that, in terms of like, like cybernetics and things of that sort, like where that's heading and stuff. But like generally speaking, if you don't have fingers, and a controller doesn't have the accessibility to allow you to play it without fingers, then you can't play the game essentially. So there's a lot of alternative controllers out there now that are made up specifically for things like people with amputees and things of that sort. And like one of those things that we were talking about, I'll throw this link in the chat, or I'll just close it and go to history and open it again. Then put it in the chat. Is the Xbox adaptive controller. This is really cool. It's got two gigantic like kind of pads in the middle that are just sort of inputs that can be pressed, to make an input happen. If you read the article a little bit, which I will, because I want to get the words right here. Where does it say? Okay. Yes, that most products are built to work the same for everyone. The adaptive controller that they're working on, that they released in 2019 and have kind of continued to iterate on, is meant to work differently for everyone. So essentially, whoever you are, when you sit down with this controller, however you would like to play or however you can play, it's supposedly supposed to work for you. And if it doesn't, then they continue to try to iterate on it and make that happen for every single individual that plays in a different way. I know that I've seen people play with like their mouths, like as controllers, as inputs. I've seen, I'm trying to think of just different things. I've seen people play with their feet, and different. This is again one section like of accessibility, like we're talking about here. It's a really wide ranging space to consider. And so one of the things I think about when you think about when you might get overwhelmed by the idea of putting accessibility in your game, if you're saying, oh my gosh, there's just so many different aspects to consider. Well, try to keep it simple. Try to start with low-hanging fruit and maybe build from there. And additionally, I think something that is really important is beyond your own ability to empathize is, obviously having people test your game of different skill sets from different, backgrounds, different diverse kind of situations, and seeing what kind of friction that they might run into. This is one of my notes that I wrote down when I first wrote down kind of the coming up with some notes for this episode was trying to prevent like the frustration level that one would have if they booted up your game and couldn't play it for some reason. There was a hurdle, an obstacle that was, unassailable. You couldn't get over it. Oh, or even worse, if you played maybe halfway through that game and then suddenly came to a part of the game where you couldn't get through it, and thus it was just, that's it, you can't play anymore. So that's where, to me, the motivation for accessibility lies for me personally. I would never want to have somebody get to a part of my game where they were like, I guess because of my condition, I can't play anymore. That just sucks. And so it's something that it's really important to try to, fathom those situations ahead of time. But you don't be hard on yourself if you come across something where someone brings up to you, hey, I'm having an issue. I can't play your game like this. Maybe if you're testing on like when public shows come back into form over the years, hopefully here the next few years, that's something that where you can really have your eye on accessibilities as people actually come up to your booth, sit down and play your game. You can see the friction that they're running into right then and there. It's different, as we talked about. I know we talked about this before, TD and Bumpy. It's different than having someone test your game like privately in the comfort of their own home, where they don't, you're not trying to watchdog them necessarily, but at the public show, you can just sort of naturally see them go through a progression, see the pain points, as Tiny Disaster mentioned earlier, that they're running into. This is maybe improving accessibility just for in general, or it could be running into individual edge cases or different things like that. But like we've seen before when we go to shows, people will run into the same obstacle at the same point again and again and again and again. Well, that's on us, right? We got to fix that. Like in our tutorial or that early part of the game, if they're running into something, if they're not getting something, if some sort of mechanic hasn't been explained to them enough for them to understand that that's what they need to do, then that's where accessibility can lie as well. Like you need to think about that and understand that people are running into a pain point here, and maybe they do figure it out over time. But is that what you want them to fumble around for several minutes to figure it out, or is it something where it's like, no, I want them to click in this with this, immediately ASAP, so they can move forward and play with the mechanic in the actual game?
Yeah, the article I was reading earlier has a really good piece a little later on about how, I don't think it mentions what game it was, but someone had given an award to a game for being accessible, and then when they were interviewing the developer and asking what they had done, the developer said they didn't do anything specifically to be accessible with it, and the point was good game design is accessible game design. Like, just having that in mind as you're designing your game, not necessarily thinking about accessibility or disability, but just making it an enjoyable playing experience that's easy to understand, is a huge leap for accessibility that not every game has it. It's hard to do. So.
Right. I would say just like what we talked about with marketing plans and development schedules and things like that, you're going to get better at it as you go through your paces with it, as you gain more experience with it. So again, don't harsh yourself too hard if you discover that, you've made mistakes along the way on your first few passes here. Address those mistakes. If you can on the current thing that you're working on, you can always go back and iterate further on your original product if you feel like that is something worthwhile to do. And if you feel like it'd make a community or a player base like happier to have that. Otherwise, if it's just something like a small project and you realize you had some accessibility issues on it, then make sure that those are addressed for the next project you do.
So a couple very interesting ones and things that a lot of people aren't going to necessarily think of immediately when you talk about accessibility and things of that nature. And also, before I dive into that, apparently in at least the parts of Europe, probably all of Europe, I know I've seen what I consider upside down traffic lights, but Missy says that they have them same thing, red at the top, green at the bottom. So apparently, I don't know where I saw them. I'll have to look it up at some point. Anyway, for instance, a lot of games have dogs in it. A lot of games are fighty, kill stuff, right? So no one likes hearing dogs yelp. It's a horrible feeling. I don't pursue doing damage to wolves or dogs or anything like that when I have a choice. So some games actually take that sound away, so you don't have to feel that just internal stab of pain every time you have to do that, which is that's a great thing to do.
I love that. I've
That's
never heard
really
of that.
good. Yeah. And
that's amazing.
What was House Flipper? They have roaches in the game at some point because a lot of these houses are really, really disgusting. A lot of people get creeped out by it. They don't want to have to deal with it. So they made an accessibility option for people who have a problem with that to, instead of dealing with the roaches and whatnot, there's broken glass as an alternative. So it just rewrites everything as just broken glass in the ground, and you vacuum that up instead of the roaches, which is, a phobia, and then just something that's terrible in general that they should never have. Dogs yelping. Nobody wants to hear that. So
9 years ago, I'm ashamed to not remember the developer or the game name but I was covering a dungeon crawler that had particularly nasty spiders. Not sprite. It was like a 3D model. Mm-hmm. And I'm not like a heavy arachnophobe anymore, but it's like I'm not like awesome spider. So I had kind of not offhanded, just sort of like tongue-in-cheek mentioned about that thing. It wasn't something that I was like, oh, I can't play this game, blah blah blah. It was just something I mentioned randomly. And so the indie developer put a smiley face on the spiders like back next time and uploaded that, and it made it like way more just cheeky and hilarious and not an annoying like ew spider. Because anytime you make a spider like personify it in any way, it just, the arachnophobia goes away for me immediately and stuff like that. The spider's like, hey, how's it going? Like with the 4 of its legs or something like that. I'm like, that's hilarious. Yeah. So it was a funny thing. It was kind of a joke, but it wasn't a thing that would address accessibility for someone who had arachnophobia, or just potentially. And they could always change it entirely as well. Like they said that I think that they were saying they said that is a good point. As in all reality, I might just make an option to change that to some other kind of like a pill bug or something like that most people aren't afraid of. But if you're afraid of a pill bug, then go for the spider. The things that we've added in CSD3 that reminds me of this, you can turn off the police sirens. You can turn off the bullets and the gunshots in like CSD3 when you get shot up at the
food truck attack
by the other food truck attacks. In 2 and 1, you can turn off the armed robberies, I believe, and you can also turn off strobes. Like we have certain like strobe light motion, like kind of like lights and stuff. Additionally, there's like large ingredient font.
Font is a big one too.
And motion while traveling and screen shake reduction options. Yep. So you can take away some of those things that maybe, again, these are all from running into or either experiencing them ourselves or seeing sort of the best practice. I wish I had a resource on me and stuff like that, but gathering best practices from other developers that have implemented great accessibility options in their own games. And if you want to research this, just check out some of the best indie games out there and go to their options and settings list and see what they have. You'll see that a lot of them are all over this kind of stuff. And David Galindo, our lead guy at Vertigo Gaming Inc. that does all the quick serve games, is a big proponent of it, and that's why we have all these accessibility options in there, and why we continue to consider adding more and stuff. Because it's like some of this stuff has to do with what this whole last section we're talking about is basically accessibility in regards to trauma, right? Like mental trauma a lot of times. So we started talking about physical trauma, but a lot of this is mental trauma as well. Some of these accessibility issues.
Yeah, and like some of them, I'm just trying to think of like where do you even start with trying to think about it? And in terms of physical disabilities, senses are what kind of jumped to mind when you were listing off the CSD ones of like sounds and colors, and color blindness is one that comes up a lot. So I know Among Us has done something to do with, because like you need to be able to name the colors. So if red and green look the same to you, you're not really accusing anyone really. So knowing like what's important to your game and where to start in terms of playability, but there's so much, and it's such a broad thing to look at, and no one's expecting anyone to get everything. So looking at like what is the most important to being able to experience your game in particular is a nice place to start. And then just looking at what some common disabilities are. And some of them are just easier fixes, like the bigger text size,
right?
Volume controls. And to Bumpy's earlier question about, is there anything that jumped out at it? Good example. When it's done well, you don't notice it. But when it's done poorly is when you're like, oh, no, this was a problem. I could only think of one game where I'd had to stop playing because for me, I have a lot of sensory issues, and it was the sound fluctuation. Like you couldn't control it in the volume because I think they were trying to build tension or something, but at the beginning of the game, the noise would just keep going up, and then like it just, in a way I couldn't anticipate, hated it. But it's not something you think about.
Yeah, not just done poorly, but maybe not done at all in terms of like the consideration for the accessibility and things of that sort. Like I feel definitely like people, like you said, if it's not part of your kind of ethos as a developer, then you might end up just pushing people out that you don't mean to, by making personal choices. Like they were like, we want to make this really personal choice to fluctuate the sound, but like you said, it was like, it's just like, it's like when you're making music, you could do some things that could be really grating, and it could be really grating and nobody would want to listen to it. But why would you do that? You know what I mean? Like, so it's just
trying to experiment and do something new or something that hasn't been done before and that kind of thing. But
like I noticed when people,
it's hard to think about it.
Like when I get really into music, I've noticed that like the grading things in music that I like, they use the grading stuff for like like a millisecond, like, and then they're like, get rid of it because it's not something that people want to hear for more. That it's like a get that sound and use that ambient sound that we were trying to use or whatever, and go from there. But anyway, so we talked about like how some of this is for on the developers of the games themselves. Some of this comes from like we talked about some of the modern controllers like the Xbox One, single-handed functionality controllers, eye motion software, implementation for controllers exist. So a lot of this, another thing that you can do as a developer is make sure that your game is, functional with some of these accessibility controllers.
There's
Which
another
I think,
option in game. We haven't really talked about hearing impaired, and I know we're trying to cover a wide range. There's gonna be stuff that we slip through and miss. It's something I thought was interesting, and I've seen it pop up in a few games. But the first one I saw was a video of, I think it was Fortnite, and they added pings on your like radar or whatever in the middle of your screen, showing you what direction bullets were coming from, because people who have a hard time hearing certain things, they don't have that advantage that everybody else has. Like, with Hunt Showdown, hearing is key, and you don't, if you can't hear, you're going to be at a significant disadvantage. So they started adding pings like, oh, I'm being shot from the right, and then you can turn and address, being shot from wherever. And that's one of those things I think is going to be a lot harder to implement throughout a lot of games, because how do you design a game? Again, we'll use Hunt for an example. That's so sound oriented. Like, you can almost see better with sound than your eyes. Not quite, but you get more information oftentimes hearing things than you do seeing them. Like, you're like, oh, there's people coming from behind me to the left, and you're like, okay. Or, oh, 2 areas over, they triggered this, sound alert, and we can see that. Well, how would you translate that into a game? I don't think they have anything like that right now, but that's one of the more challenging ones to really address, because I think it would start being really crazy, like bird off to the left of your screen, like, huh? Like, for a person who isn't, hearing impaired or deaf or what have you, it'd be very weird to have that as like a default setting, but I wouldn't be opposed to having those as options.
yeah, augmented alternative communication tech is what I had down for the deaf and mute. Chat transcription, speech command interface, and then the ping system is really intelligent, because like it can get really convoluted. But if you think about it, if you can't hear anything, then can you design something that visualizes the audio? Now, like there's the obvious things like like you said, bird to the right kind of thing or something like that. But maybe you could do a thing where if normally those that could hear the footsteps of a hunter coming closer, maybe instead there's a really subtle thing that
Light
happens
pulse,
visually, right? That doesn't just sort of, it like hearing the footsteps, you have to be kind of aware to catch it, as opposed to being aware with your eyes instead of aware with your ears in this case, right? To catch that initial, like, okay, something's coming, and then of course as it gets closer, it becomes less of a hint, subtle thing, and more of a, hey, this is obvious that something's happening here and stuff. So that design there, the possibilities are endless, and some of the cool things you could do, as opposed to just the bare minimum hunter footsteps down this direction, compass pointing kind of thing and stuff,
Yeah, I
which you
think
could
something
do.
like maybe like a light pulse, like flashing and getting like a little bit more intense or something. But again, that might trigger other problems. But
it's fascinating though.
yeah,
The discussion there is a rabbit hole,
and
like,
it's
for sure.
super difficult too, because I mean, I don't know. Like, you'd have to almost do like a study. Like, oftentimes they get a bunch of people together to do a study of whatever.
Mhm.
You'd have to get a bunch of people that have these disabilities or these challenges to overcome, and say, does this work for you? What are your ideas on how we could implement this into the game? And again, a lot of them might not be game developers, might not have an idea. So yeah, it's a tough one. A lot of options that you can go with, a lot of choices you could make, but it'll all be very interesting. And you have to give people credit that can adapt to that too, after not having had it for so long. Go ahead.
It's finally, I think we're finally in a space where most of the professional, or at least a good amount of the professional part of this industry is focused on it now, is pushing it forward, and there are at least some leaders in the industry that are taking it upon themselves to really push the tech and really push advocate for these for folks that would normally not have that advocacy. If we think back to 10, 15, 20 years ago, this is a thing, like many things in our society, that was just brushed aside and wasn't really considered, wasn't really given a platform. And thus now we're at a point where I feel like we're really moving forward in the right direction, and the only pushback is from people who are not really professionals. The only pushback are from people who this is coming from like a very specific part of accessibility, but one that I know Bumpy and I have discussed before. The idea that your game that is typically a challenging game can also have lower difficulties for folks that aren't looking to play at like that, the highest difficulty. Well, and like I said, to preface this, I feel like these people aren't professionals, Bumpy, right? I feel like they're just other. There's maybe some developers that there
are a few that,
but I don't. But it's not really a high. I feel like it's a super low percentage of actual developers, and I feel like it's a pretty low percentage of players too. I feel like most people are either why not, or at the very least they don't care.
Yeah.
From the developer standpoint, I think a lot of the people who are against all this need to appreciate that developers would want as many people as who will enjoy their game to be able to play their game.
It doesn't make sense to not have it. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so, that's the ultimate goal, right? To allow as many people as possible to play your game. That's the ultimate goal from the developer standpoint.
So yeah, the big takeaway for me out of all the accessibility stuff, I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to be good and help out, but one of the ones that is gate kept, it is the probably, as Cup is indicating, the vocal minority, the very loud, obnoxious minority that's complaining about it. But difficulties in games. If you have a game that has 65 different difficulty settings and it fits everyone who ever wants to play it, that's great. Why does it bother me if I play on Super Ultra Mega Death Elite and Cup's playing on this is my first game or whatever, you know? It doesn't matter. We're both being able to experience the game. We're having fun with it. And if you need to do something where, well, I did better than he did, you know, you need that ego boost, put in achievements that say you beat it on hard. Done. Problem solved. Stop complaining. Move along. It's such a silly, ridiculous thing.
And critically, that's rewarding something that if you do it, you get a reward for it. But there's no punishment for not doing it, right? Like, so if someone, and again, if you can, it's definitely a thing that you just gotta have an understanding for. But I totally agree. The one thing that bothers me is that a lot of I don't think it's a huge like percentage of total people, but enough people are apparently offended that they can beat a game on the hardest difficulty and other people choose not to. And that they're just like they almost think of them as lesser because of that. And it's very frustrating because that's a huge lack of empathy in terms of not just accessibility, but like how people's lives work, right? Like not all of us are savants and or have 20 hours a day to put into video games. So it's a thing that is, I feel like a lot of those people that are saying that are in one category or the other like that. And it's very like, okay, that's really a limited scope in terms of, you know, everybody you're talking about. And it's ultimately a really weird hill to die on. It's a random thing to fight for. It almost feels like you don't have enough things to fight about already on the internet. So it's very odd to have it.
Selfish way of thinking it, that like these players don't seem to appreciate that they are not the only player of the game. The developers don't only care about their experience, and other people enjoying the game does not diminish their enjoyment of the game.
Like why would it matter if somebody played it on a lesser difficulty than you? It makes no difference. It doesn't affect your gameplay at all. Now, historically, though, this has been a developer-spawned problem because I believe in like Doom, maybe like one of the earliest games that you can go back and think about. If you beat it on easy, I could be wrong. I don't know if it's Doom, but I did hear this, that if you beat it on easy, you couldn't finish the last boss. They called you like a loser and you had to start over again on normal or whatever to get the true ending. And there's been a lot of that, not a tremendous amount, but there's been several games that do things like that throughout the history of gaming. So we've come a long way, but then you go and you look at something like From Software. Now, the only thing I can say with that is the developer is trying to craft a specific scenario for Dark Souls and all these things, and they want people to experience that. I still think they should have different difficulty settings because there's a lot of people who bounce off the game. It's too hard for them, and I totally get it. But it's a tough one. It's like, well, I want you to play this specific way. You know, this game, I crafted this tale. I want you to be able to experience it that way. That's why generally when I play games, I look for whatever the developer's default setting is because I want to see what they want me to go through. And then if I find it's too easy, then I'll increase the difficulty. I rarely go easier, but sometimes I do. So it happens.
What I will credit to From Software is that they do still capture the experience of, regardless of whether you want to play the game the hard way or the slightly less but still hard way. It's something that you have to kind of discover and figure out or look up, right? Like how to necessarily get that done. So if you just play the game with just a sword and I'm going to block and I'm just going to try to get through this, like basically the hard way is what I'm talking about there, and just, be up close and stuff, you can. Now, this isn't true for some of the earlier games, but this is what I understand about Elden Ring, at least. And I think this is true for some of the earlier games, just as it comes along. There are parts that maybe you have to deal with something on your own, melee and stuff. But a lot of what I've seen in Elden Ring, you can basically say, I'm going to go with this kind of item or this kind of magic and just reduce the difficulty of this situation like tenfold. And then I've seen pushback on that from players who are like, you didn't really beat the boss, etc. But it's like, From Software, to their credit, actually does give you an option to not do it the way that you see a lot of people like painstakingly go through and do it and stuff. It's just that you have to know how to go about that, which again is kind of their thing, right? They want you to have to figure things out as you go, and you succeed through your failures, so to speak. That's the sort of spiritual From Software feeling you get with all of their games, is that they're like, yes, be prepared to hit the wall and splat and come back and do it again until you figure out what you're supposed to do. Now
it's one of those.
It's such a tricky thing, right? Because I feel like accessibility comes into play very easily, very quickly, and in this situation. But I think that they are trying to give players within their regular mode options to make it easier for them. But again, you have to know what you're doing in that situation to take advantage of it. And there could still be a lot of trial and error and frustration that a lot of people are eventually going to bounce off probably anyway, right? Like before they can get to that point. So it is worth considering.
Even like accessibility in terms of how we've been talking about it and just meeting players where they're at. I don't play a lot of these. Like, I'm interested in Elden Ring and even Skyrim, all of those big franchises. I do not have 50 hours to put into a game. I do not have the attention span to play a game for 50 hours to beat it. I would like to experience the story and the art and all of that. But these games aren't accessible to me in a way that I just don't have that block of time to immerse myself in this world and become an expert swordsman and all of that. But I would still love to experience these games. So I'm curious to see how that kind of evolves in the industry over time.
Yeah, it's weird. I haven't played any of the last couple of Mortal Kombat games, but I have just watched the story modes on YouTube, just to see what they do. And I find them okay. They're not amazing stories or anything like that. They're trying. They have some of that AAA gravy on it that's like, I'm gonna always talk like this all the time. You're like, okay, it's kind of caricature or weird and that kind of thing, but it's exactly what you're talking about in terms of I've found a way to enjoy what I wanted to enjoy out of the game without actually playing it. Now, I'm not sure if that's exactly what you mean, just to see the story, some of the beauty of it, and then maybe have one interactive moment with it, or you play a particular piece of it.
I wouldn't even mind the battles or whatever, but I'm not going to redo the same battle 15 times. So I think
that's
play a whole other game in that time.
From what I understand, Elden Ring is a game where if you don't have a good time with someone, that's a toughie, you could just say, okay, I'm heading this direction then, away from them. So that's kind of a nice thing. That's not necessarily the case in the earlier Souls games, although there's still some times where you could do that. Again, there's moments. And I'm guessing there's moments in Elden Ring where it's nope, you got to deal with this thing no matter what to proceed. And that's just the way it is. Like, because you got to get certain items. Bumpy knows better than I do, but you got to get certain items, certain things, keys, etc., to progress through areas. They're usually on the big bad dudes, like, or at least the medium big bad guys. So yeah. Anyway, it's a thing that's like, I agree, Bumpy, that if there was difficulty settings, that could definitely improve things. They obviously are so into what From Software is very committed to what their style, presentation is and all that kind of stuff, and I think they're sticking to their guns as best they can without like, blocking people out entirely. Obviously, Elden Ring, people are pushing through with the difficulty curve for a lot of this because it's one of the best selling. That would be really interesting to see. This is like an AI War thing stat. AI War has sold like crazy amounts of copies, right? But how many people have actually played it? How many people have actually played past 30 minutes of it? That's really interesting to think about. So Elden Ring would be an interesting study, I think, as well. How many people own it versus how many people have a median play time over like 2 hours? Because I guarantee you a lot of people have it just to own it, or bought it, thought it was going to be great, realized it wasn't for them, bounced off it, etc. Yeah. So
a lot.
It's interesting to think about. Yeah.
Well, it's like I said, the whole series is kind of, it's almost like, it's not quite an exception to the rule, but it's one of those things where they're not bending, they're not moving on it, and I think it gives a little bit of breath to the people that are like, oh, well, games are meant to be played how they're meant to be played. It shouldn't be easier just because you're not as good. You can get better. And that's not always, that's definitely not the case. People can't do that. So I think they're part of the problem, but at the same time, it's the tale they want to craft in the way, this is how we do it. We're giving you a bunch of different options in game to play with, and you go from there. If you can't do it, you can't do it. It's a weird one.
It's like games as art is a way of looking at it, and like what the developers want to get across and all of that.
Yeah. Right. That's a great point. That's a great point. You know what I mean? Like that was kind of, I think, what I was clumsily trying to get out before with their spiritual, approach and all that kind of stuff. It's like, that's their art, like the way they would like to present it. But it's funny because, again, it gives, like you said, Bumpy, it almost false feeds the people that need the satisfaction of there is a software, or there is a IP, or there's a game or series out there that will, stand for, the hardest difficulty, all that kind of stuff. But I just don't think From Software actually sees it that way. And if you look at how people were talking about Elden Ring, I don't think a lot of people that are for accessibility in games are like massively against From Software or anything like that. Like, a lot of people are really enjoying that experience. So it's almost like the people that are like, haha, we got you. Everyone's like, yeah, great. It's fine. Like, who cares? Like, I'm happy that you're happy and you're not yelling about it. So, like, at this point, because I just feel like they do a great job of. Anyway, we're just getting lost in the From Software stuff. But yeah, it's just I feel like you're right. It's a really complicated situation with them, and I would say I would not expect to see difficulty settings on any of their games anytime soon. So,
in general, I think we all agree, and we said it's a selfish way of thinking to be like, oh, you have to play the game the way I play the game, otherwise you're not validated as a player and you shouldn't be playing. That's a silly and ridiculous thought. So more difficulty settings, the better. I don't see any problem in it, and it's kind of disgusting when people do see some issue there. I don't.
Yeah, or they're like, you shouldn't use this mechanic that's been put in the game. You're like, what? Like, I can summon someone to help me in this fight. I'm going to do that. Like, I don't need to be told that I can't solo it, and that or that since I didn't solo it, it's not an accomplishment, or I shouldn't be allowed to continue to play the game. It's just so silly.
I wanted to jump to one of Missy's earlier comments, just talking about people having opinions on what is and isn't okay in terms of accessibility. Missy had said, I never thought of accessibility for mental trauma. I played an indie game a while back, which touched on my own trauma, and I wish there was a warning before, but that would somehow spoil the story or whatever. Because I know this conversation's been had a lot in publishing of everything to do with trigger warnings. And some people hate them, and you shouldn't have to blah, 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 blah. But it also hurts no one. And
yeah, ignore it if it doesn't apply to you, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Because it's usually not oh, it's trigger warning these general topics, not trigger warning this specific thing happens at this point to this character.
Right. Actually, Boyfriend Dungeon got in a little bit of hot water because of a lack of trigger warning in an early for a particular part of their game. And again, it was that discussion of art versus responsibility to your players, or the responsibility that you hold to your players, and people that have dealt with trauma that they got into in a way that was sort of like a shock to, like, it just caught them by surprise that it was there. And I think that eventually they did implement a warning at the beginning now. So it's interesting. Again, it's no hate on Kit Fox, but rather they ran into a situation. They had a reasonable discussion about it, like adults with people on the internet, and they moved forward with a solution. So that means that's like the best you can do, really, if you have that kind of situation come up. If you can identify that obviously having sanity checks. If you have a company that's more than just you, and you can kind of go over some of the potential, do we have any red flags here that we want to address? You can always hire an outside company like Indie Brothers or other companies to look over your material as well and sanity check for you. Sanity checking is very important before you go public with some of your works. So yeah, because you just don't know. Maybe it's your one perspective, so you might not know that you have something in there that might offend, and not even offend, but hurt, right?
Just making the experience suddenly viscerally uncomfortable for someone, like Bumpy talking earlier about dogs yelping. I am a regular user. I don't know if this is the exact URL, but like doesthedogdie.com. If I am watching something and there's a dog, I will check if that dog is going to die. Like, I'll still watch it, but I'd really rather brace myself than have just, like, surprise, animal violence.
Some of the best movies have dog deaths in them. It's really difficult. I hate it. I totally agree with that.
And I will happily spoil the plot for myself if I can know either way of, like, I don't have to worry about this or whatever.
I love that we all hate that. I mean, I don't expect anybody to like it, but it's just like, that's one of our least favorite things.
Missy was saying that, especially with battles over and over, glad that we got to a point where some games give you the option to automate battles, speed up the animations, extra points, or options to avoid attract battles, which kind of is one of those things I feel is kind of respect to the player, because they're like, all right, we know a lot of this is just going to be like auto-attacking through battles. Why do we want to waste our time or waste your time doing this? So instead of it taking, 65 hours to beat a game, you could speed it up and beat it in 30 hours or 15 or 20, depending on
travel time is the big one. Like for me with ADHD, a big reason I don't play a lot of those big, massive open world games is, well, as soon as I have to walk 10 minutes to get somewhere, I will just walk somewhere else in my house. Like, I'm not going to do it. So.
Yeah.
That's why quick travel is a big part of a lot
being
of
able to turn off randomized battles in old school RPGs is a new accessibility option. I've seen a lot of PC re-releases and things of that sort, or at least like you said, or at least speed it up. Like
one of my earliest frustrations playing video games is like Pokemon Red and Blue. Like, please stop random attacking me with Pokemon. I'm just trying to get somewhere. I do not need another whatever this is.
I don't need to fight the 30th Caterpie in this forest just to try to get to the other side. Yeah, it's very frustrating. It can be very frustrating because that back then was a core part of the experience, but now it's more a thing where it's like, hey, where a lot of us are in a different place in life. Like you said, some of us have always been in a place where we're just like, this is not something that I've enjoyed. And it's just come to light that it's like, look, you can put that in a game, but you're creating more friction by doing that because it's for players, and you're going to have more people bouncing off because if you don't get the balance right, like there's certain games where old school RPGs I play where it's the thing where you just take another step, every step, just into the battle. You're like, oh my god.
See, now, I'm in the opposite camp because I get frustrated like you guys do, but I actually like going through all it, because like that's growing up, that's what it was. Like that was the gameplay. That was all that.
And if it's
now, it doesn't bother me that other people wanted a different way, that they had these options. I choose usually to not use them. I might speed them up a little bit, but other than that, this is a great thing,
And I think that's kind of, I agree with you. I think on the first time through, I'd always like to do that. But then if like let's say for Final Fantasy 9, I'd really like the option to avoid a lot of those things as I played the game 6-7 times already and stuff, just to get past some of the stuff because I'm like, I know what I have to do. And at the same time, they tell you it's fine if you skip past some of this, but you're gonna have to level at some point, right? You're gonna have to get your experience somewhere.
Yeah.
And so you can't just skip them entirely and stuff. So it is a thing that
if you
I feel
look at things like World of Warcraft that now just like you can jump in at level 60 if you want to. Like a lot of those players have played this game so many times, leveling up new characters of just like, please don't make me spend this many hours just to create a new class that I haven't played before. I don't want to go through the forest again. It's the same quest, even though I'm doing it with a slightly different skill set.
They've also redesigned the earlier levels so you get them quicker and you can do things that are considered slightly more fun to level up faster versus doing those same quests. So it has evolved quite a bit over the years. Plus, like you said, they give you free level ups to 60 on X number of times you can do to get up to wherever you need to be. So yeah, they've done basically like that.
But what we're talking about here, that sums it up right there, like multifaceted accessibility, right? Like multiple options, different choices for people, or choices for people that want to go about it in different ways. I mean, it does come back to the design a little bit, like how the design is implemented and how deliberate it is towards accessibility. Like if you're really thinking about really good randomized battle RPG games, could you design a game that for the most part felt like a perfect median of the amount of battles you get into is the experience you need, no grinding necessary, and not too many battles hitting you in the face all the time? That's something that comes from the design and the development side that you may be able to find a way to get to, also through testing and players pre-release testing and getting feedback from people, like folks like that. So
they also usually have two options in games like that, where I hate one of them and a lot of people like it, and that is level scaling. I personally don't ever want level scaling because I'm one of the people that I don't mind going and grinding, and all of a sudden I'm 5 levels higher than I need to be and I can crush this thing. I want to feel rewarded for doing the work I put in. But a lot of people are like, well, if you have it level scaled, then when you get to the battle, no matter how high of a level or low level you are, you just fight it on equal terms and it's fine. I'm like, no, if I come in and I'm struggling against a battle, I want to be able to. So I like that there are options. And
I also feel like it's hard to get level scaling right.
Yes.
Because like it's really easy to just say, oh, we're going to boost up their attack or whatever. And it's like, that's not necessarily the best way to scale an enemy and stuff. Like if so you'd have to like dynamically scale each enemy. It would be such an undertaking.
Finding the balance in that is where the really good game design comes into play. When teams do it well, it gets talked about, and that's great, of finding a way of like, okay, it's level scaled, but technically you'll want to play it in a certain order. Like you have the flexibility, but also this is going to be a little tricky if you just jump into it right from the beginning. Like there's ways to play with it in whatever your game is, and it's interesting to see how people approach it.
Yeah, I think that's something that that when Bumpy mentions it, I'm like, have we run into level scaling that's actually good yet? Because I wonder if it exists.
But I'm always wary of it.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think like for most part, level scaling would be bad. Like it would just be implemented in a really poor way.
I haven't played it, but have either of you done Breath of the Wild?
Very little.
I've played a little bit, and my kids have played more.
Yeah. I have friends who love it. In that game, you can address things in pretty much any order you want to. So I assume there's some of it going on, and it's clearly a very good game.
For sure.
Missy was saying that she played, I think it's Inkenfell, option to skip battles.
Yeah.
Which was nice. She liked the story, but didn't care for a tactical RPG. But then she got comments. Now that is a problem if you are doing reviews. You sort of need to. Again, it depends on what you're doing with the review, and it's good that you disclosed it. But you do sort of need to play the whole game in some capacity, at least try some of the battles out. So you can always say, I really didn't care for the battle system. They did maybe this, and this right, and this I didn't like. But overall, I skipped most of it. That should be fine. But yeah, people will always be like, well, you didn't play the game because you skipped this or that. I wouldn't let it get to you. But at least try a couple battles, I would say. So at least you have an idea what the battle system's like. in that kind of situation.
But I mean, the bare minimum is to just point out that, like, this review comes from the perspective of someone who did not play the battles. Like, so I think that's important to state, because that at least gives someone reading, the sub or the text they need before getting into it to say, okay, I understand what this review is about, and I think that's important, because it just tells them up front. But yeah. Wow, we're actually pretty close to time.
Yeah, any last things you guys want to mention? Go over.
It was like 25 minutes, like 2 minutes ago, and I was like, "How are we going to get to 1 or 4 p.m. Eastern?" And here we are. So, I really think it's just something that I hope people continue to invest time into. Invest their, bringing people in that are, designers, developers into their studios that come with an accessibility first kind of approach, because I just think that like you said, ultimately we're just trying to allow as many people as possible to play games, play our games, play any game. So it's we all know the joy we can get from playing games. We all still do this, even those of us that have been playing for decades on end still find magical, awesome moments. So to get people the power to enjoy interactive, like this very cool interactive medium, is an awesome responsibility that I hope we keep on taking on and keep pushing forward with, despite some of the challenges, both technical and like societal. But there's just limitless type of stuff that can happen here, that everybody, like almost everybody, if not everybody, could benefit from, as we continue to kind of push deeper down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think looking at it from the perspective of games at their core, and I'm sure there's some exceptions, are supposed to be fun. And being able to look at it from the perspective of how can I make this fun for as many people as I can, which doesn't mean never being frustrated or not having a seamless gaming experience, but it's a video game. It's supposed to be enjoyable. So if you can make little changes to make that possible for more people, by doing things like making text bigger or turning off annoying noises or making the controls adaptable, there are so many little ways you can make it fun for more people that are going to seem unimportant if it's not something that you think about all the time, but matters so much to some people. So it's worth keeping it.
Some more honorable mentions, things I don't think we covered that I've noticed, and I've noticed this more in AAA games than I have in indies. I'm not saying that they don't have it, but they have, when you get onto a menu, they have the option of descriptive audio, voiced menus, where it tells you what you're selecting. So for people that are more vision impaired and things of that nature. And I think there's one other thing that goes with that, but I can't remember exactly what it was. But I just remember specifically Ubisoft games. I've noticed that with like all of their stuff lately.
And some accessibility options can be limited based on budget, right? Yeah. Like what you just described there, indies might just not be able to afford.
Yeah, that's
within
what I
their
was
budget,
thinking
the ability
too.
to do it and stuff. Yeah. So that's you want to see that led from the front with the people who have the money to do that, right? Like and big AAAs definitely do that. So that's nice to see, and you would like to see some trickle down effects. We've talked about some of this tech, some of this software, etc. The more that this becomes open source, the more you'll see advancements and kind of easy, eventually there'll be a program, Bumpy, that an indie developer can get, and it will implement it in a way easier way than having to just like code it in and that kind of stuff. I can see that happening with just what you were describing there, and having like a built-in thing that with a voice,
like one of the text things, yeah.
Right. That's like, maybe an AI voice or whatever, like already built in to do all that stuff, so that they don't have to go find someone to get to read all the lines, et cetera, et cetera. And those things are probably, I know that they already exist to some extent. So
after having these conversations from the indie side to the AAA side, people are going to start coming up with creative solutions to problems we did not think about 20 years ago for different disabilities, different accessibility issues. And those solutions will become more commonplace within the industry as we find, oh, this is a clever way to deal with color blindness, or this is a great way to deal with sound. So we're getting there.
This is why it's there's a light in a tough world right now, because of all the things that we are talking about right now that we never talked about before. Advancements can be made in these places which would never have been made, because the conversations are happening, because these things are out there and being talked about. Whereas before they were just swept aside and never considered, never given the credence that they deserve. So it is tough because it's just so visceral and in the face, and there's a million things going on, and there's another thing to worry about every single day, it feels like. But at the same time, like, I think we're going through, it's like if you took a step back as a person that could see the timeline of how humans work, we would be going through a really nice growth phase right now. Like, we're just, unfortunately, we're just smack dab in the middle of it, and it's chaotic. Because, you know, we all have different perspectives.
I think that about sums up humanity right now. We're just smack dab in the middle of the growth phase and doing our best.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. If you're a human living right now, you just got to do your best. That's right. That's how I feel about it too.
That is very, very true. Sorry, I was checking to see if something did not work on my new toy that I have, a new device. I'll have to play with it and see what's wrong with it. Anyway, so that's it. Next week we're changing what we were going to originally do. It's kind of up in the air, so we're not 100% sure what our topic is for next week, but we will let you know when we know. And any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're going to do. We're going to talk about some various resources, communities, other things that you can look into if you're an indie developer and trying to kind of keep up and look for opportunities to, you know, gain exposure, wish lists, etc., things like that. I've got at least a few resources in mind to bring to the table, and should be interesting to talk about those, and hopefully people can take them and run with them themselves. Any developers that are in on chat that don't know about some of these resources yet.
All right, sounds like a plan. So we'll be back next week at the same time, right here, doing the crazy stuff that we do. So farewell. We'll see